Hey, what's up? It's another episode of Film Streak. My name is Rob, and what I do here is I talk about some new films that I've watched. Generally new films, but sometimes much older and more specific, right? Sometimes it's something where I just kind of get into a lane of films or a specific topic or subject matter. And, the previous episode, I talked about a lot of documentaries. And the thing is, sometimes they can spur something like this. I watched this documentary called The Hitler Chronicles. I think that was on Peacock. And that was one of those that, I was just in this run of watching documentaries, and I said, oh, wow, what is this? This looks kind of interesting, but also a little sketchy, because it's like, I don't know how far down this road of learning about Hitler and Nazi Germany and that whole period of time. I don't know how much I really want to go into that. But watching the documentary, it's interesting because here's a couple of things about it. It's telling us the journey of the man himself, and from a young boy to becoming the person that we all know today, the most notorious figure in, let's say, European or at least world history, right? And yet, in some ways, it does a thing that I'm not sure how I really feel about, but it kind of humanizes him a little bit. You see some of the actual journey of going from his younger days, kind of rising through ranks and taking over, and just the, the nerve to do everything that he did. And so, that's where I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this. But this documentary does a really cool thing, though. I mean, it's not necessarily taken from like all of Adolf Hitler's personal journals or accounts, but it's also from other people, other figures at the time, other world leaders, other military commanders, other just regular citizens in Europe, whether it's Germany or Poland or even England or France. So you get a lot of different voices, and you mix that with actual archival footage from that time, from those parts of the world. And it goes beyond just telling us about Hitler and what he did and his rise to power and all that. It is more about the overall state of the world at the time from all these different points of view. And I thought that was pretty fascinating, I mean, you think of any big moment in history, any kind of major world event, you're either going to see it from afar or you're going to see it up close. And it's hard to see it both ways. It's just kind of the way it's always seemed to work out. You don't really get both views. You don't get the full picture in the moment. And here, at least it kind of gives us that, which is, one, it's unusual, I think, because usually a documentary will focus on a very specific thing, which I thought this was going to do, and just drill down, right? But no, this actually does kind of pull us out and zoom out into the bigger picture and give us all these different voices too. So it's not just like, let's say Hitler and Nazis and their side of things. It is a pretty rounded collection of these accounts. I mean, there's even quotes in there or moments that are from Winston Churchill and other world leaders that are on the opposite side of everything. And yet you have people that are, on vacation, just Germans that are on vacation, and they're just writing down or talking about things that they're seeing happening. And I think the thing that it gave me was a perspective on how something like this can be happening in your country, in your society, and you might not even realize it's happening. I think here in America, I think that's the big fear, is that a leader, a political power, can suddenly turn everything on a dime. And yet it doesn't really work that way. It can work that way. It has happened. But it's a very slow moving process, really. And it is a gradual thing that, oh, this kind of thing goes away, or that new thing is introduced. And it's very iterative to the point where you all of a sudden, a couple years down the road, you find yourself living under a dictatorship. And I mean, that's how this played out. I think that's the fear here in America. I mean, this was also the fear with communism was, oh, the communists are going to come in and infiltrate, and slowly but surely we're going to become a communist country or a socialist country or whatever, without really understanding maybe what those things mean. I mean, clearly they have the track record, those sorts of societies, but the fear of it, because we've seen it, I mean, it's documented. And here is probably the best example of how it's been documented from all these points of view of a country that not only changes internally, but just starts expanding outward and starts to basically try to take over the continent. And so that's where I think it highlights the danger of it. The danger of having this kind of a person as a leader. And look, here in America, I think that's very clearly been an issue or been a fear with a lot of people who rise to power, whether it's presidents or state leaders, any political figures. It's like, whoa, let's check this dude. Because what is he on? Like, what are we really going to turn into if we follow this road? So it was an interesting look at that. And I think it was assembled pretty well, too. I mean, the amount of, let's say, voice talent that was involved must have been pretty hefty. And even the footage, it's a lot of old footage, a lot of old film, reels, newsreels, that kind of thing. But it's restored and it's cleaned up and everything was like correct, like frame rates were corrected and the colors were corrected and like the dirt was removed. And, it looks very pristine. It looks like it might have been shot or filmed not, 70 years ago now. So, after watching that and really kind of letting it sink in of like, this is how this country, this is how this part of the world sort of devolved into what happened in terms of World War II, in terms of everything with the Holocaust. Like, this is how it maybe played out. I said, all right, I don't necessarily want to watch more documentaries about this. I want to get into how this was approached in narrative work, right? Like, give me some feature films that really go into this. And of course, the one that I've always wanted to see, but I never really got around to, is Downfall. And I don't know if you've ever seen that. I think you understand the power of it. It is about basically the last days of World War II, and Hitler is at the center of it, and it's about his basically about his either disillusionment or his detachment from everything that was actually happening. And part of that, as it's shown in the film, part of that is because the people around him are starting to kind of shield him now from what's actually going on. Like, oh, we've lost a lot of our forces. We don't have strategic, we don't have the upper hand in some of these situations, but we're not going to tell him because he's become a madman. And not just in the sense of his ideals, but in the things that have been committed in the name of this country or in the name of this war. So you see a lot of the bubble that he's in and the people that are basically trying to either contain him or find a way out of this war. That's not to say there weren't a lot of order takers, because we see that too. We see the yes men and we see the ones that are like, ride or dies. But the other interesting thing is it's kind of shown us from the perspective of someone who is not, like Hitler is not the protagonist of the film, which I was kind of worried of, like, how's this going to work? Like, how do you make the worst person in the world your most important character, right? What this actually is a story about a young woman who I guess basically is appointed to be like one of his, I don't know, it's like a secretary or assistant or something like that. And so this is the doorway. This is what leads us into that inner circle, because now we're seeing Hitler himself. We're seeing him deal with his commanders, his people in charge. And we're starting to see where he's gone astray. Like he's really like lost sight of everything. And that's how we kind of get the portrait of the man and everything that happens at the end of the war. It even goes so far as to show us like what happens to him, which I've always kind of, I guess, heard about or read about, but I've never really been clear on like, how did that work? You know, I guess in my mind, I always thought, you know, look, hey, spoiler alert, I guess, if you just never study history, but like Hitler kills himself by the end of the war. Right. And I always thought in my mind, it was a last act of desperation, of cowardice that, well, everything's fallen apart. We've lost and I'm just going to peace out. Right. It turns out it's more complicated than that. And even the actual way, or at least the way it's shown in the film, I don't know how historically accurate it is, but the way it's shown in the film, it is more of a decision. It is more of a thing to consider. It's not just such an immediate, like, oh, I just got to go. It is a thing where it's a gradual process. And it comes down to the fact or the idea that he's just not going to leave Berlin. And he's not going to surrender. And so it's like he's going to die one way or another, so he's going to do it at his own hand, I guess. I mean, it's laid out with a lot more nuance and a lot more of care than just that. But I think that's the idea. It's like it's not just like, oh, the man's in the corner and he just pulls the trigger. It really is like, okay, what happens once I do that? Like he sets in motion plans for what happens when he's gone. Like that's a whole different thing than I ever thought of. So I think the thing I took away from the film overall, though, was that it is showing us again, sort of like the documentary, it's given us a look at what it's like to be so close to that kind of like horrifying power, whether it's the man himself, whether it's that level of power, like over the country and over the war. It's interesting to just see like because we also get moments of street life, like just society as it's happening. And that's where we're able to understand, like, not everybody's on board with this. Not everybody really even understands where we're going. And yet this whole thing, everything is just, it's on a gradual decline. I mean, you know, when you get to the point where you have children fighting on the streets to defend your capital versus where you started out of like invading other countries, you are clearly on the back foot, right? Like you are done. And it even kind of gives the perspective of like some of these people, they never imagined there would be anything besides victory. They clearly had an idea like we were going to change the world in our own vision. As scary as that sounds, that is what some of these people were on. They were not playing. And, you know, I guess there have been some fictional works that have explored that, right? Like, what if Nazi Germany won World War II? Like, how much would the world change? And, you know, I can't really say, I don't know if I've read or seen them all necessarily. I know there's like, what is it called? The Man in the High Castle. And I think they made a series on that. And there's, I think there was another film called like Fatherland or something like that. And, you know, it's been explored in different ways, and sometimes really kind of metaphorically, like through science fiction or other genres of like, what if a evil dictatorship somehow took over and like started to rule society. And I just think this makes it clear, makes it real for someone who was not alive at the time, of course. It makes it real, like how serious these people were about it. Like the ones who were leading this charge, like they really thought they were going to take over the world and it was going to be the way they wanted. You know, and look, we can talk about this in a little bit, but I feel like that should be informative to where things stand in today's world. So, all right, let me get to another one here. Once I saw Downfall, and you kind of get a glimpse of the inner circle, right? You get not only Hitler in the center, but you get all the people who are around him. I said, all right, I got to see, like, there's got to be some other films that talk about that. And so I found this, looks like it was maybe like an HBO film, like an HBO original or something. It's called Conspiracy. It's from 2002. And it's about the, I guess, infamous meeting of German officials and commanders and people in charge to decide what to do about, I mean, I hate to even say it this way, but the Jewish problem, right? They come up with the final solution, which all of that is so, I mean, just the language of it all is just disturbing, you know? But this film leans into that. The way that these people talk about how to exterminate this entire class or race or line of people so casually. I mean, it's almost even clinical. Like this hatred, it's disturbing. I mean, they talk about the Jewish people as like objects, not human beings. Whether they're talking about the different methods or the different logistical issues that come with it of, you know, or do we evacuate these people? Do we sterilize them? What is the best form of cleansing that we can do? You know, that, and that's how you know, like you on some real atrocity type shit, you know, where you don't even look at people as people anymore. You just look at them as items, as numbers. And I mean, you know, we do get in this. So this film, it takes place in this one setting, in this one period of time. I don't remember, it's like a few days time. Or even if it's just one day, it's kind of like, look, it's it's like the darkest version of 12 Angry Men, basically. There's like all these men sitting around the table, kind of stuck in this room, in this building, and they got to figure this out. Like they have orders from Hitler, I guess, himself to come up with an answer. And some of it is about the mechanics of how this all played out, like who came with what ideas, who resisted it, who were the people that were like, no, we shouldn't go to those lengths. We need to find other, maybe more humane, quote unquote, solutions. Other people are all about like, yo, let's just put everybody in trains and like get them out of here. And then when it finally comes around to, it's like, oh, well, we have these camps. So let's do the gas chambers. Let's do the crematoriums. We can knock out 60,000 a day. Productivity goes up. We're super efficient. Whoa, wait a minute. We're talking about people. Yeah, man. That's rough, you know? That's what happened. Maybe not exactly as it's shown in this film, but that is generally the idea of what happened. You know, the thing I'll say about this film is like just the film itself, right? There are some actors in it that you would pretty quickly recognize. Kenneth Branagh is in it. Who else? Stanley Tucci's in it. And, you know, the only thing is like they are kind of, because they're so recognizable and because they're not even German, it stands out a little bit. It can be a little bit distracting, but look, like I said in talking about some other films in the past, at least they try to put on an accent. They try to put on the right sort of approach to the characters, because they are playing real people. So we do know what these people look like. We do know kind of maybe what they sounded like or what they thought. That's where I felt like, maybe that's a little bit, on the nose. But it does kind of work out, because I think you get past that pretty quickly when you just hear what they're talking about. So one of the characters in this film, and I say character, but him is a real person, Reinhard Heydrich, he is the one that essentially kind of seals the deal with this solution. He's the one that's there to figure it out, to wrangle all these people, get all these ideas sorted out, and put a stamp on it, And so he immediately becomes known as the mastermind behind this stuff. And so, interestingly, I found another film that is about this group of Czech soldiers that are sent on a mission to kill this man. It's called Anthropoid. It's from 2016. It's got Cillian Murphy, which, look, the man is hot right now, but he's always been doing solid work. And this is one of those where him, who else is it? Jamie Dornan, I think, is the other guy that's in it. There's mainly the two of them, but there are other characters involved. But they're on this mission to basically parachute in behind enemy lines and blend in with the locals and find the right opportunity to take this man out. And so a lot of it is the suspense of just not being discovered, of being able to fit in and not draw attention. And so it's a little bit of like a spy thriller in a way, right? Like these guys are on this secret mission and they're going, in their minds, they're going to the top, right? And so I thought it was really well done in that sense. Like it's a quiet film. It's not flashy. It doesn't have a lot of, it does have some pretty incredible action in it, but it's not throughout the film, right? It is more about them either trying to figure out how to do this mission or wrestling even with, like, is this the right thing to do? And not like, hey, is this the right to kill this guy? It's like, they're about that. But the fact that they have to like forge some new relationships and maybe turn on people that, at an opportune time, like they still have to keep the mission in mind. They can't just like totally like be a part of society now. So they're kind of living in two worlds at every moment. And I tell you though, this film really builds to a pretty incredible climax. The showdown at the end of the film when the team, they're holed up in this church and they're like basically underground, like in the basement, and they're trying to either just wait it out until they can get out of town or they're going to make their last stand there. And turns out that's what happens. And man, I got to say, like, that's actually a pretty great sequence. Like the final, like 20 minutes of the film where they're in this church and they're being surrounded and the soldiers are just making their way up, because they're in the basement and they're up in the upper levels. And watching those two different tracks of these characters, like just looking for anywhere to hide, anywhere to find a spot to defend themselves, is actually really tense. I got to say, it was pretty thrilling. That's when it does lean into the action of it all. And of course, look, it's a real thing that happens. So it's like, well, as much as you might want things to go a certain way, they're going to go the way they really went. And so I thought it was pretty well done. It's got some good performances in it. Cillian Murphy, again, is always solid, I feel like. And here he really kind of leads the whole show and puts us in the mind of these people who are on this very dangerous but also important mission. And so there's another film I saw though that has a lot of recognizable actors in it also. It's called The Gray Zone. It's from 2001. And this is about a group of prisoners, Jewish prisoners, who are basically put to work in the camps, right? They are the ones that are running the crematoriums. So that means essentially they are the ones killing their own people, which is horrifying in of itself. But, you know, because look, not everybody would be on board with this, of course, right? This is not something most people would be interested in. It's like, oh, you want me to not only just kill a person, but you want me to kill my own kind? Whoa, wait, what? But there are those that are going along with it to just save themselves. And so then it's like, whoa, are you a collaborator? Like, what is really going on here? And then you've got the other people on the other end of it who are plotting. They're like trying to get out of this. They're trying to find a way, you know, whether to revolt or start some kind of uprising. So you're seeing a couple different angles of this play out, you know? And then everybody, of course, is faced with the guilt of it all, of being a part of this, but also the grief of the loss, and just not only the loss of maybe friends or family or countrymen, but even just the loss of your country, of your society. Like, these people were taken from their homes, taken from their lives, put in these camps. And this is what they're faced with, this kind of hell now. It's pretty emotionally traumatizing, right? So the film, I feel like the story is really interesting. And yet the thing that kind of takes me out of this film is the cast, because it's a lot of recognizable faces and they don't put on any accents. They don't lean into being Jewish or even European, you know? And so, I mean, look, you got like, who's in this? Steve Buscemi, David Arquette, Harvey Keitel, Natasha Lyonne, Mira Sorvino, Daniel Benzali, who, look, bro, I ain't seen in a minute. And I don't know if he's even doing anything anymore, but Murder One was my show back in the day. But I feel like I see why a lot of these actors were in it, because it's an important story to tell. And I mean, if you have a Jewish background, of course, this is something you want to be a part of, to represent, I'm sure. And yet, and I take it back. Harvey Keitel at least goes German, right? He plays a Nazi, and he at least leans into the accent and to the whole vibe, which is already scary because the man himself, like, he can get up there, right? But yeah, I don't know. I didn't feel as strong about this as I thought I would. The story, I think, is important, but a lot of the work with the performances, I feel like, I don't know, we could have done something different. And so that leads me, of course, to this last group where I said, all right, I'm going the other way. I don't want to watch any of these types of stories or films with any American cast. Like, I want to give me something like authentic. Let me feel like I'm really there. I'm really with real people, in a sense. And so some of the films I saw then, I saw this film, The Captain, which, you know, it's about a Nazi, a deserter, who, as he's trying to escape and run away from the war, basically, he finds a captain's uniform and puts it on. He decides to pose as a captain, mostly just to survive, to not be discovered, like who he really is, and avoid any kind of punishment, right? But it leads him down this road. Like, he meets other soldiers and they kind of fall in with him, thinking he is who he says he is, not who he really is. He ends up at this prisoner camp and he kind of takes charge there and, in a sense, starts kind of living it up, starts to like really like be that guy now. And even to the point where he takes over like the camp, like, oh, this is how we're going to handle these prisoners now. We're going to use them however we want. We're going to do whatever we want with them. Pretty depraved kind of shit, you know? When he starts to really go above and beyond that, even, of like, you know what? I'm actually here on a secret mission to make sure that the people of this country are protected and that there is no bad things being done by people in the countryside, right? So he's out here like policing the civilians out here now. They go into the city, and that's when he gets discovered. Somehow somebody rats him out. You know, there is a little bit of tension, like some of the other guys that he picks up along the way. They're like, who are you again? And why are you here? Like, what mission is this you're on? Like, they question it, right? They're skeptical, which, I mean, I think that's the thing that I kind of took away from the film is like, oh, the Nazi regime, the Third Reich or whatever, and this, world force that is taking over Europe. This is such a big operation. It's like, not everybody's going to be on board. And you're going to have some people that are going to infiltrate, that are going to be turncoats, right? That are going to be not who they say they are. And not even that they're on the enemy side, but they're not on your side, And that's kind of what this film gets us to, is this captain, this young man, he's not really there to do the Nazi thing. He's there to just look out for himself. And that becomes clear by the end of the film. So then it's like, well, wait a minute. All right. When the real Nazis actually do catch up to him, then it becomes a matter of, okay, now there's a price to pay, He gets court-martialed, and funnily enough, they commend him for his take charge attitude. It's like, well, there are worse things that have been done. So, we'll just turn a blind eye. And, of course, this is all about the approach you take to this when you're losing the war now. It's like, well, we kind of need every man, even the ones who aren't quite as dedicated, It's a weird dynamic. But I tell you what, this film on its own, because this is based on a true story also, and yet it's done in such an interesting kind of stylistic way that I really enjoyed it, actually. I mean, look, it's got some dark moments in it and some things you wish wouldn't have been a part of history, but it's shot in this really distinct, kind of stark black and white style. It's got a really eerie, just really unusual score, like the soundtrack to it. And it even has a couple of little flourishes that you don't see coming. And it's kind of open to your interpretation, how you feel about it, when we interject like real history in this story, which kind of seems like it's made up. And I'm sure parts of it are probably exaggerated or condensed or fictionalized in some ways. But, when we have a moment of color and then a title card that comes up saying like, no, this really happened, and here's what is left today. Oh, it kind of like takes you out of it for a second, but it kind of sobers you up too. Like in a moment where the film feels like it's getting a little bit out there, a little too fancy, we have just one shot that like brings you back to like reality. Like this was real. And even the end credits, like the end credits is like some weird kind of genius play. And I don't know if I can really even explain it. You just have to see it and see how it connects to the film. But the entire end credit sequence, I mean, it's footage. It's a scene that is happening basically, but the credits are rolling over it. And yet there's such a juxtaposition and it's kind of a clever, kind of a cheeky, dark, satirical version of something we've seen in the film. I don't know how to explain it, and I don't want to give it away, but it's really cool. So this one I really liked, actually. I thought it was one of the stronger films in this group. And so on that, I said, all right, well, let me see. Is there anything sort of similar to this, And I found this other film. I think both of these are on Amazon Prime. It's called The Auschwitz Report. And this is also a true story. It's about two prisoners in the camp who are plotting an escape, right? They want out of this, as do most of them. So they come up with this plan to hide and to basically go missing. And with the idea being like, okay, well, the Germans, the security, they will go searching for them to try and find them. Like, where did they go? Like, maybe they got out into the surrounding areas. So they of course do that. They set up the perimeter. They start searching for them in all the areas, but they're actually hiding in the camp. And they're basically going to wait them out until they give up the search, and then they leave, right? And so there's a little bit of that like suspense of first not getting caught, planning it, and then doing the thing, finding the hiding spot, and then not getting caught hiding. And all the while, everybody else who's there, besides these two guys, everybody else who's there in those like barracks or in that specific area that is supposed to know where they are, right? Everybody gets counted. They're the ones that have to pay the price. They're the ones that suffer the consequences of not having these other two guys. And so there's a little bit of the excitement of possibly escaping, but also the torment of knowing like everybody else is suffering because of you. So we're watching different sides of this. And half of the film is about that. It's about that escape attempt and how it goes and who all is kind of around the situation. And spoiler alert, I guess they do get out. They do escape. So the other half of the film is about them trying to find their way to safety, like trying to find somewhere that they won't get caught or killed. And once they finally do, then it's about them telling this story, like recounting what is happening in these camps. Because here's the thing, this Auschwitz Report, right, this is the name of the film, this is about these two guys kind of opening the door on like what's really going on in these camps. Like they aren't just prison camps. They aren't just like a place to put prisoners of war or prisoners that were taken. It's like they are labor camps, they are death camps, and they are being treated inhumane, right? And they are being treated with the utmost cruelty. And it's specifically a certain type of people, really. And so these guys were the ones to kind of crack the door open on like what's really going on in there. And they're faced with skepticism. They're faced with a lot of questions because according to, you know, everything that's above the table, like that kind of thing is not supposed to be happening. Like Germany's supposed to be playing fair. And it really sheds light on how much of a bureaucratic failure it was that this happened in the first place. The fact that nobody really thought this kind of thing was going on. And it's even in the film, it's stated, it's like, the Red Cross was dropping supplies and food and aid to some of these areas, to some of these camps, but that never made it to the prisoners. The Germans were using it. And that's the thing that, I mean, we've seen it ever since then. We've seen it happen, but, you know, I think this was the first time where it's like, wait, oh yeah, you don't have to play fair, I guess, huh? As long as you hide it well enough. And so that's where, I think that's the significance of this story, is like highlighting these two guys who were brave enough to make it out. Because that's the flip side. You do see that in a lot of these films, actually, is any of these films that we see people in camps, you know, you're kind of set up with the idea of like, look, you've got one soldier who's in charge of all of these prisoners. Or you put it this way, the odds are not in the soldier's favor. You've got hundreds or thousands of prisoners in these camps, and you don't have that many soldiers. So why couldn't you just overrun the place? They're not even like high security prisons, if you really think about it. They are terrifying. You're surrounded by military, not like just security guards. But still, it's not something that if all of these people decided they couldn't do something. But I think you have to remember, right? It's like this was not a thing that people thought would happen. That's my take on it, you know? Even today, right? You take our world today, the world you live in, the society you live in. Where in your imagination would you think that your local government or your state or federal government would come and take you out of your home and put you in a camp and deprive you of food, deprive you of basic human rights? And where would you think that would really happen, you know? I think for a lot of people, it's you just go about your life. You're trying to pay your bills, trying to take care of your family. You're trying to enjoy your time with, I don't know, your friends. You're trying to just do your job. You know, all those basic things that we just live day to day going through. For someone to just totally remove us from that and say, look, this is the way your life is now. I think a lot of people, they wouldn't know what to do. They would go along. I mean, I've talked about that with some other films in the past where that kind of element to a story is a part of it. Is like, you could say you're going to be that guy, but when it comes down to it, you might not be that guy. You might just be the one to go along. You might be the one to have a hand in it, looking out for yourself. So that's where I think, man, watching these films, it really gives you some perspective, you know? Of course, some of these are creative works, or they're somewhat fictionalized, but a lot of these are based, actually, I think all of these that I'm talking about, let me see here. I think all of these are based on real events or real people. And yeah, all of these are. So, you know, whether they're entirely accurate or not, or dramatized to some degree, whatever. But the idea that this was a real thing that happened. This is a real point in time. This is a real place in the world. And this has given us a perspective on how people handled it, good or bad. Which, hey, of course, that also brings me to the whole reason I went down this road in the first place, which was the zone of interest. And, you know, look, that's a film that I think got a lot of attention late last year, certainly got a lot of attention this year when it won the Oscar. And Jonathan Glazer, who I like some of his films, but he gave a very distinct and very kind of controversial speech. And, you know, look, that's commenting on a current day situation in a different part of the world. But I think his point was, that doesn't mean it's different. Just because it's somewhere else and it's a different time, that doesn't mean this same thing can't be happening. And so that's where, you know, if you look at it through that lens, I see the point. Is it maybe a little bit insensitive or misguided? I don't know. I'm not in that. I don't really know. I said that when I did that episode a while back. I'm not informed enough, you know, sadly, I guess. But here's the thing. I'll tell you about this. I mean, the zone of interest, I think it does that thing of showing us, again, the casualness of evil sometimes, right? When you have that sense of like hatred and darkness, but it's just out in the open. It's just a part of life. It can make it seem like, well, this is just how the world is. Like, atrocity is just your backdrop, you know? It's like, that's just what you do. And I mean, put it this way, I applaud it for taking a different angle on the whole thing. Because I feel like, you know, there's only so much of this you can really sit through and be okay with, of watching these stories of people who are in camps and seeing the most horrific things. And to kind of flip that and show us the people who are living life and finding some things to enjoy, finding some minor annoyances, and finding that they still have the luxury of dealing with petty things. Like, to show us that side of it right on the other side of a wall. Whoa, that's a pretty bold move, you know? I'll give it that, even like in terms of the sound design. I know that's a big thing that people talk about with the film. It does use that as a tool to show us, like, basically the other movie, right? The movies I've already talked about. We kind of get that playing in the background, in the distance. And so we are seeing both sides of it in a way, but it's almost like, well, but we're just going to turn a blind eye to that part. We're going to look over here instead, you know? I thought that was a really interesting decision. I don't know if it's necessarily the strongest of these films, you know? I think Downfall, of course, is really the closest, the most up close you want to get. And Bruno Ganz in that does a really great job, of course. I mean, he's really laying it down. It gives us the kind of high level and the, you know, ground level view also. The Captain I really liked. I thought that was a pretty different kind of point of view of someone who is basically trying to find themselves out of this whole thing and ends up being back in it bigger than they ever thought. Conspiracy, that was interesting to see just how mechanical the whole process became of dealing with an entire group of people, which is scary, you know, to think that that's how it actually could have gone down. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these films, I feel like, honestly, this has given me a much better and deeper understanding of this. Of course, you know, we're talking about fictional works in a sense, but it's giving me a better context for some of this, you know? Like you can start to see like, oh, that person in that movie is basically who was in charge of this that happens in this movie. Got it. And that decision was made at that point in time in that other movie, right? Okay, got you. I'm starting to connect some dots now. Of course, all that said, it's like, I think I'm kind of good now. I think I'm straight with everything about World War II and Nazi Germany and the Holocaust and all that. But I'll tell you, there is something to some of these films of having a sense of authenticity by having German actors, having either like real locations or very close to real locations. I'll give that to The Gray Zone. They didn't shoot in the actual camps, but they recreated the camps. They rebuilt them. And so you can see, like, it feels very much like, well, like we do see it in the Zone of Interest. That, I think, is the first film to actually shoot in one of the camps or the crematoriums. In The Gray Zone, you see the same place, but it's not the real one. So that's at least the level of dedication to telling that story. It's like they went and rebuilt these places, which why would you want to do that? But they did it to at least make it somewhat authentic. So all these films, I think they're trying. They're trying different ways to tell these stories because they're important stories and it's an important part of history. And to go back to the Zone of Interest and the comment there, I think this is all important history because we don't want to repeat this. And we don't want to watch it be repeated somewhere in the world when we have a chance to stop it or change it. That's my take on it, I think. I think there's value in that perspective. There's nothing wrong with saying that. There's nothing wrong with saying, we know what atrocity looks like. We've seen it. We have it documented. We can tell stories about it for days. So why would we ever put ourselves as just people anywhere in the world? Why would we put ourselves on track to let that happen again, right under our noses? Like even in front of our eyes, on TV, right? So, all right, that's it for me. This one's gone longer. I talked about a lot of films this time, but I wanted to really get through all of these. I've been watching these over a few months here. I don't recommend you watch these all in a row, like just marathon all this. No. You're going to find yourself in a really weird, dark place, I think. Maybe check out a couple of these if you like. Otherwise, hey, look, go to filmstreak.com, find some other episodes. You can find the list. All these films on IMDb. You can sign up to get new episodes by email. I'll make it easier for you. You don't got to do podcast apps and all that. And until next time, I'm gonna go watch something way different, of course. Maybe something a little lighter note, you know? And you too. You go out there, you do something, have fun, stay safe, enjoy life, tell your loved ones you love them, and go watch something new.